Let's talk about the standoff between Ghana and South Africa. I want to talk about some of the videos that I came across online.
Ghana did not just fly people home and go quiet. They went on offense. Ghana's Foreign Minister Blakwa summoned South Africa's acting High Commissioner to formally protest, reminding Pretoria of Accra's support during the anti-apartheid struggle and stressing that attacks on law-abiding foreigners contradict the very principles of African solidarity.
First of all, there's no law-abiding illegal immigrant. South Africans are against illegal immigration into South Africa. So calling illegal immigrants as law-abiding citizens is just strange.
Now think about the weight of that language. Ghana is essentially saying, we helped you get free. And they did. And this is what you do with that freedom?
Okay, there's a couple of problems here. Listen to how she sounds like she's saying that our freedom in South Africa was given by Ghana. And this is how we're using that freedom that Ghana gave us. Secondly, when the apartheid government were killing black protesters in South Africa, there were only South Africans being killed. There was no Ghanaian or any other African in the crowd. And whatever dealings that your governments had during apartheid, they were not between South Africa and those governments. They were between ANC exile members and those governments of yours. Your governments and leaders knew that South Africa was the most industrialized country in the continent. And they knew that these exiled South Africans that they were dealing with would eventually take charge of governance in the country. So these governments and leaders were actually positioning themselves. It was a strategic move to benefit from South Africa in the future. So whatever deals that were happening, they were not between country and country. It was between your government and exiled individuals. South Africans were fighting in South Africa, and whatever deals that took place, it was between your government and those ANC members and individuals. South Africa owes you nothing. If you guys are so kind, why are you not helping DRC or Sudan? And if your contribution to our struggle was solidarity, now that we can appreciate. And we will also be in solidarity with you with whatever issues that you are also going through. But we will do that from the comfort of our own homes here in South Africa, just like you were also in solidarity with us from the comfort of your own home.
Because for decades, the implicit deal on this continent has been South Africa is the big brother, the economic engine, the anchor of African integration, the country that gets to set the tone. But that deal was always built on an assumption, you see, that South Africa would treat the rest of Africa as partners. But that assumption is now being publicly tested, and the results are not good. Analysts are warning that xenophobia in Africa is a bottleneck to trade, investment, and integration. And it is. When you consider South Africa's role as the anchor economy of the African Continental Free Trade Area, that $3.4 trillion single market vision depends on trust between member states. So think about what the African Continental Free Trade Area is supposed to be. A continental single market, free movement of goods, services, and people.
Here she's talking about free continental trade, but she's directing it at South Africa. She's describing South Africa as the anchor of Africa. And that's clever. I'll tell you why. Because she can now claim that as an anchor, South Africa must be treated differently. They must lose their sovereignty, and this free movement of people must happen only in South Africa, as the anchor, of course. But no, South Africa is not a continent. South Africa is not Africa. South Africa is a sovereign country belonging to the South African people. And this so-called anchor, we reject that. That's a manipulation trick. Let someone else be that anchor. Let the giants of Africa take that title instead. We don't want to be the anchor of anything. We just want to be South African.
So where does this go from here, right? Where does it go from here? Well, a few things are coming fast that we need to be watching, right? June 30th is 5 weeks away. That is the deadline. March has set. If South Africa does not act decisively, the movement has threatened a national shutdown. Oof. The government is scrambling. Nobody knows what happens on July 1st. And the AU meeting in Cairo is June 24th to the 27th. Ghana's petition will be on the table. For the first time, xenophobia in South Africa will be a formal agenda item at the African Union. That's significant. South Africa will have to respond not just to Ghana, but to the continent. And then April 2027 is the TAQA lease deadline, 11 months away. But every single development in this diplomatic standoff between now and then will shape what Ghana decides about that mine. You know, the optics of renewing a South African company's license while Ghanaians are still being repatriated from South Africa, trust and believe, would be politically toxic in Ghana. Yeah. Goldfields, they know this. Ramaphosa, he may know this. If he doesn't, well, right now he does, because Goldfields have approached him.
Here she's threatening our leaders. She's basically saying, look, if you don't deal with your South Africans that want laws to be implemented in South Africa, we will deal with you at the upcoming African Union meeting. She says that at that AU meeting, South Africa will have to respond not only to Ghana, but to the rest of the African nations. But South Africa does not have to negotiate its sovereignty with anybody, let alone Ghana or the rest of the African continent. When Ghana is exercising its sovereignty now, removing South African mines from Ghana, nobody is calling Ghana to the AU to come and explain themselves. So please, African countries, if we are going to work together going forward, we're going to have to respect each other. I find it disrespectful that a foreign country will attempt to summon South Africa to come and explain themselves and their laws and the implementation of their own laws, especially being summoned by African countries that are governed by dictators and Western puppets with no regard for human rights. The whole Africa just watched our institutional court hold a sitting president accountable, and now some of these countries that are governed by the laws of the jungle want South Africa to come and explain themselves. And for the record, we support Ghana for taking their own development and putting it in their own hands. These companies are mostly valuable to their shareholders more than they are to South Africans. Yes, our pension fund is the majority shareholder, but there's a lot of things that we can invest in back home. So we support Ghana. And here's where South Africans need to be careful with their leaders. Some of these companies may go and lobby our leaders to intervene. And that's why you may hear our leaders, some of whom are shareholders in these companies, coming after South Africans for no real reason, to protect their own interest in these companies operating in other parts of Africa. And that's conflict of interest. That's why you can't have leaders who are also operating as private businessmen with shares all over the place. Because when they speak, you don't know whose interest they're speaking on behalf of. Now look at what Ramaphosa said back when he was campaigning for votes.
Everybody just arrives in our townships and rural areas and set up businesses without licenses and permits. We are going to bring this to an end. And those who are operating illegally, wherever they come from, must now know.
And listen to what he's saying now that he's in power.
We do not walk alone in this freedom, fellow South Africans. And we did not walk into this freedom on our own. We were carried by a tide of solidarity.
Now, there's a problem when you hear that companies are lobbying your president to go and intervene for their own interest. A company that's not even state-owned. Because when people hear that these are South African companies, they assume that these companies are making money for the South Africans and South African country. But the reality is that these are privately owned companies that are registered in South Africa and also trading in the South African Stock Exchange. Now you have presidents, and then you hear that these presidents are being lobbied by some of these companies. And then the same leaders say one thing today, and then the next day you hear them say something else. And then you hear that these leaders have foreign currencies in their couches, and all of this just makes the country nervous. It's hard to trust that these leaders are serving the interest of the people and not the interest of people that we don't know. Now, I saw an interesting video from a fellow South African who is highlighting how South Africans and South Africa may be hurt by the closure of the mine in Ghana.
Well, let me help you out. Such people don't understand how economics work. South Africans, when South African companies operate mines, factories, logistics, retail, telecommunications, banking, or infrastructure projects in other African countries, the benefits are not only for the rich executives or politicians. There are ripple effects. There are ripple effects. And what are those ripple effects? Those ripple effects are South Africans themselves, they get jobs either directly or indirectly. The mechanics service those mining vehicles and machinery. The suppliers get the contracts. Security companies also get contracts. Transport companies also get contracts to move equipment. Pension funds, our pension fund in South Africa, also invest in those companies. Their tax revenues flows into the South African economy. And the strength of South African corporations supports the value of investments and retirement funds. For example, major mining operations involves your engineers, involves your artisans, involves your diesel mechanics, involves your truck operators, your safety officers, your procurement companies, your catering companies, your construction companies, your insurance companies, and financial services. Even if you, as a poor South African person, don't work directly in a mine, the broader economy still feels the impact, and you will get to benefit either directly or not directly.
Yes, the brother does have valid points, and I can even add more points to further strengthen his argument, and also shareholder dividends which get taxed and then add to our tax revenue. But all of this would not be that much considering that the mine is generating around 7 billion rands revenue. So all of these benefits would only amount to a few millions of rands, which is basically 0% to our GDP. And then our brother mentions machinery. But this one is irrelevant because it doesn't matter whether the mining is being operated by South African companies or Ghanaian companies. They will still use South African machineries. And all this equipment will still be serviced by South African companies. Unless they stop buying from us, which would mean that they would have to spend way more overseas just to punish us. But that's not profitable. And they still want to make profit. So I assume that they will continue buying from us until a more competitive alternative emerges. The thing with business is a person might hate you, but if their profit margins still depend on your services, they will continue to use you. Business is not a favor. It's a real need that's being satisfied regardless of how we feel about each other. Now let's compare this with spaza shops. We are losing around 200 billion due to lack of proper documentation. And then let's look at remittances. When illegal immigrants occupy jobs and send money back home occasionally, that money is called remittances. Every year we lose about 35 billion of that money. Now let's do the math. So you want to tell me that we must forget about a 230 billion economy just to save a mine that is contributing 0% to our GDP? Let's be serious.
Because Ghana controls the fate of South Africa's most profitable mine on the entire continent. And right now, Accra is in no mood to be generous.
She seems to be gloating about how Ghana controls the fate of our most profitable mine in Ghana. She almost sounds like she's saying that Ghana controls the fate of South Africa. But Ghana does not even control the fate of Ghana itself. How would they believe that targeting a mine that is doing a legitimate business in Ghana, contributing to the tax and the GDP of Ghana, while employing Ghanaians, would somehow destroy the economy of South Africa? That mine is contributing 10% of GDP in Ghana, while it's contributing 0 in South Africa. That mine has way more impact in Ghana than in South Africa. I hope that Ghana is doing this because they want to take more control of their own economy, and that they are not doing this to play some economic game, because if that's what they're trying to do, we can play that game too. Ghana needs South Africa more than South Africa needs Ghana. The things that South Africa gets from Ghana, they can source from elsewhere. 3 things in particular: gold, crude, and cocoa. But Ghana needs industrial goods that it can only get from South Africa at an affordable price. If they were to lose access to this industry, they would have to get the same products from outside of the continent at premium prices, and that would destroy their industries immediately. What Ghana is doing is divisive and is destroying the unity of Africa, all because South Africa wants to exercise its own laws. And instead of encouraging their citizens to comply with our laws, they choose to start a trade war. We in South Africa are peaceful people. There's a reason why we are consistently being voted the most kindest and most peaceful people in the world by other countries all over the world. Because we are peaceful people and our kindness has been exploited for far too long by fellow Africans. Africans have been pointing their finger at South Africa for far too long. Now it's time I warn you to. This will not end well. There's something about God or the universe, call it whatever you want. But there's something about God that when people lie and act in bad faith and then try to sabotage the progress of other people, ultimately they end up hurting themselves.